What I want to talk about today is how I see the changes that are going to happen over the next 20, 30 or 50 years and what really needs to happen during this time. I became conscious of what was going on in the world and health and so on about 40 years ago when I was the age of 24, living in London, started studying macrobiotics, got inspired by a book by Dr. Andrew Stanway, a large book on alternative medicine, and he went through every alternative medicine that was then around, not very many, maybe 20 or 30, and macrobiotics and shiatsu, oriental medicine, really jumped out at me, which is what started me on my journey of studying these. So I want to describe a little bit about what's happened over the last 40 years. We're in the middle of an enormous transition on the earth in many different ways, and the birth of these was starting around 40 years ago, and now we're in the middle of a lot of changes going on, and this can help guide us as to what is going to happen and what we individually need to do in the next 20 to 50 years, depending on how old you are and how long you're going to be around in this lifetime. So a little bit of history which you may be interested in. 40 years ago, really a lot of the movements now which are in full flow were really only just beginning. So environmentalism. 40 years ago, 1980, hardly known. I remember visiting the Friends of the Earth office in London, tiny room, Friends of the Earth. These were very alternative. The whole environmental movement, not heard of. Now everybody's talking about environment. David Attenborough, a marvellous ambassador for nature. And we're facing climate change, and so the whole world is woken up to the fact that we are part of nature. We're not living separate to nature and in control of nature. Actually, we're part of nature, and we really need to start respecting nature a great deal and working with nature rather than just using it or working against it. With health, the orthodox model of health really predominated at that time. There was a small number of complementary medicines around, maybe a dozen, maybe 20. Only just beginning, only used by a great minority of people. It's so interesting in history to see how the pioneers, when something new is beginning, they get vilified, criticised, made wrong, and then maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, everybody's saying, yes, we fully agree with these principles. And it's very frustrating when we're trying to create change. It can be very hard work as a pioneer and coming for a lot of criticism. So complementary medicines and practices like yoga, tai chi, qigong have multiplied enormously, both in terms of the number of them. There must be hundreds around now, and the number of people using complementary medicine, I can't remember the latest figures, is something like 35-40% of the population are using complementary medicine now. Really far beyond the recognition that it's given by governments, very frustrating, and by the medical establishment, orthodox medical establishment, although that's really beginning to change now. The importance of food. 1980, it was considered by Western science, medicine, society that food really had nothing to do with health. Really, if you had whatever health problem, you could just eat what you like. Food had no influence on health. Then in the 1980s, a lot of research showing that a high-fat diet was contributing a lot to heart disease. And the 1990s and into the 2000s, cancer, partly because of cancer greatly increasing in frequency, started being studied more by Western medicine and finding out first one, then another, is caused or a great contributing factor is our daily food, plus our lifestyle. Cancer is not an inevitable disease. It is primarily a lifestyle-caused disease, as is heart disease, as is type 2 diabetes. So gradually these connections are being recognised more widely. Type 2 diabetes, back in the 1980s in Macrobiotics, we were seeing people and helping people with pre-diabetes or recently developed diabetes or even long-term diabetes. With newer diabetes, helping people turn that around and get out of it. With more long-term diabetes, maybe just lessening the symptoms. Not always possible to completely turn it around. And wonderfully, in the last few years, just the last couple of years, that's really started being recognised by Western medicine, that when people have pre-diabetes or newly developed diabetes, it's usually possible to turn it around by changes in diet, exercise and lifestyle. Fantastic. So this knowledge of how our diet and lifestyle is a primary cause of disease, and also we can use to prevent health problems and maintain good health, and very often heal a lot of health problems, has begun, but really has a long way still to go. Some other changes that have gone on: a lot more emotional awareness. In the mainstream media, emotional healing just never got mentioned back in the 1980s. I can't quite remember when it was, the Hillsborough disaster, 1980s, 1990s. I remember the first time on the mainstream news, emotional healing getting mentioned, that some of the survivors and I think maybe some of the police went for emotional counselling. Because they were so distressed and so badly affected. Emotional healing really, and an awareness of what is happening on an emotional level, really coming to the fore now, and along with a lot of complementary medicines, a lot of psychotherapy, different emotional counselling, and a lot of different approaches to healing emotions, to healing past trauma, really in the forefront now, which is just fantastic. So we are really getting into swing with some deep emotional healing happening now, and kind of, it's sad to say as part of that, really realizing the degree of abuse, including sexual abuse that has gone on in the last half century. I think recently in France. The French committee found that the Catholic Church, the Catholic priests, in the last 50 years had abused in excess of 200,000 children and individuals, and that other staff, and including other staff members, over 300,000 people in France have been abused by staff of the Catholic Church. This level of abuse, can destroy people's lives and really takes so much healing. So these things are beginning to come out. And, we're in the middle of a big social change of actually admitting these things and looking at these things and finding ways of helping people heal these things. We're in the middle of this environmental crisis. And seeing how we need to change our whole way of life, our whole way of using energy, our whole way of consuming, our whole way of eating, our way of agriculture, our way of travelling, our way of creating energy. All of these things need to drastically change. So we're really in the middle of difficult times and also very exciting times. Then I want to say a little bit about where I see these changes going in the next 20, 30, 50 years. Because this is a time when we all need to be acting, both in changing our own approach to life, our own lifestyle, and also putting pressure on those who have positions of power and control to bring about larger scale changes as well. So I want to pick a number of different subjects. First of all, food, favourite subject in macrobiotics, but by no means the only subject. Really, there's a consensus coming about that the best way for humanity to eat is a plant-based diet. That is basing our diet around grains, vegetarian sources of protein from beans, pulses, hummus, processed soy products in limited amounts, etc. Sea vegetables, fruits, nuts, vegetable oils, etc. Along with possibly smaller amounts of some kind of animal foods. This diet really makes sense from a health point of view. This would greatly increase everybody's health. Please have a look if you're in the UK, or if you're not if you're in other countries, have a look at the UK National Health Service website and go to healthy eating. They're now recommending a very much plant-based diet, reducing processed foods, reducing refined sugar. All of these changes really need to help. This would save so much illness, so much disease, so much suffering, and so much expense on national health systems. Really, we could see a big reduction in degenerative illnesses and other problems as well, which would just be fantastic. So this understanding has really begun in society. It's really being studied by science now, and really this, hopefully it's going to really gain wide acceptance in the world. Probably first more in the Western world. Unfortunately, China is really lagging behind, a high population. Apparently their meat consumption is increasing. Back in the 1990s, I did a lecture tour of South Korea, and was kind of dumbfounded to see that these South Koreans, whose traditional diet was plant-based and fairly healthy, they were very attracted to all the Western foods and Western ideas, and starting to eat dairy foods and eating more meat because they thought they needed the protein. They were adopting the worst aspects of Western nutrition from the first half, or the first 2/3 of the 20th century. So they were going in the opposite direction. Hopefully that's not going to go too far, and they will start seeing that many of their dietary traditions were really the healthiest. It's amazing how so many of these issues are all interconnected. So eating a plant-based diet not only is great for our health, this is also the easiest way to feed the world's growing population. Just in this last week, various programs talking about how in many countries of the world, actually, the population is now going to start decreasing because the reproduction rate has dropped below 2.1, which is what is needed to maintain a certain population. Still, some other countries like Nigeria have a reproduction rate of 5, so their population increasing rapidly. But we're certainly going to have a high population on the earth, and still increasing for a while. Easiest way to feed the world is a plant-based diet. Raising meat uses at least 10 times the amount of land area and vastly more of water resources and other resources in creating that meat and animal-based foods. So it really makes sense from the point of view of feeding the world, which largely means that we don't need a lot of genetically modified foods. That is not a particularly necessary solution. Our choice of food also has a very big effect on the environment. large areas of Borneo are now just palm groves. Have a look at Google Maps at what's happened to the Amazonian rainforest. Enormous chunks taken out of it. Why? Mostly for raising cattle or growing soybeans to feed to cattle in Brazil, and also being exported to Europe, North America and China. So by not eating imported meat or eating meat or other animal foods which are fed on imported foods like soybeans, will greatly help the environment and help reduce the destruction of the Amazonian rainforest and other lands. Obviously, change in food is also really going to help reduce climate change. Agriculture contributes at least 20, maybe 25% of the carbon to, or not carbon, but contributes to global warming. Cattle produce a lot of methane, which has about 20 times the heating capacity of carbon dioxide. So greatly reducing the amount of animal food that we eat, again, is a major contributor to reducing global warming. And that also includes dairy foods. So I want to say a little bit about dairy foods. Traditionally, Europe, Middle East, certain parts of the world have used limited amounts of dairy foods. Large amounts of the world, most of the Far East haven't traditionally used dairy foods. They're not a necessary food for health, as has been thought, and is still sometimes put out that it's necessary for calcium, or that it's a good source of calcium. There are many other sources of calcium. Plant foods can be excellent for calcium. It's not necessary to consume dairy foods for our calcium intake if we're eating a good variety of plant foods, whole grains, beans, seeds, vegetables, etc. So we really need to kill that myth that dairy foods are good for the health. They also come along with a lot of fats, which for people on a high-fat diet definitely cause health problems. Also create a lot of mucus problems, a lot of lung problems. I've seen countless people with asthma, hay fever, breathing problems heal those problems with a change in the diet, including reducing or cutting out eating dairy foods. Reducing our animal food intake will helps our health, the environment, helps feed the world, and will also really help contribute towards reducing climate change. So that's one thing which I think there's going to be a big change in. Health, which is a subject which I'm particularly interested in. We're in the middle of some good changes, some new awareness. Really, the awareness that is to come is that 95% of our responsibility for our health lies with all of us individuals. It doesn't lie with a health system or other people or the pharmaceutical industry. Really, from 40 years of studying macrobiotics, of giving thousands of health consultations, of teaching many, many people, and seeing the remarkable ways that people have healed health problems, and seeing how people have maintained good health for years or decades with minimal use of pharmaceuticals or needing to use Western medicine. And by the way, I'm not against Western medicine. Fantastic, we have it there. It's just that it should be we can achieve a much higher level of health and need to use it much less. And there'll be much less burden on the National Health Service, much less personal suffering, and also much less of all of our personal income having to go into propping up a health system which basically treats illness. It's not to do with health. They're called health systems, but really they're treating illness. They're not promoting health. And what we need is health promotion. So I think that the biggest, one of the biggest changes that needs to happen in, on a society level is realizing that health mostly belongs in our own hands. We can empower ourselves. We can learn to look after our own health. And this is hopefully, the change that is we can see is in progress right now, and hopefully is going to continue over the next 20, 30, 50 years. To choose a couple of examples, heart disease. Still the major killer in the Western world. So obviously, primarily a diet and lifestyle caused illness. We have many people taking statins to reduce their blood cholesterol. That's a Belgian phrase which I love, which is doing something too late, which is putting a plaster on a wooden leg. Using statins is putting a plaster on a wooden leg. If one has high blood cholesterol levels, change your diet and lifestyle. That will almost certainly, and I've seen dozens, and this happened in dozens and dozens of cases, that's the way to bring your cholesterol level down. You don't need to, if you do that, you don't need to take statins for the rest of your life, which all drugs have side effects, and for some people the side effects of statins are quite strong. So let's get down to the causes of health problems and how we can fundamentally look after our health. Let's change our dietary and lifestyle habits. Type 2 diabetes, still very much on the increase. Taking something like a fifth or a sixth of the British National Health Service budget, just treating people with diabetes and the consequences of diabetes, which are fairly dire. Blindness, kidney failure, contributes to dementia, which I want to talk about in a minute, heart disease, amputations, etc. Also greatly lowers immunity, which I'm going to talk about more in a second. And dementia, big new scare in the world. The rates of dementia in current trends are due to increase greatly. Looking after people with dementia is very expensive, plus the emotional toll on the people with dementia and on the families and people around them looking after them is great too. The evidence that is coming out is, again, dementia is primarily a diet and lifestyle caused illness and is therefore largely preventable. I'm not saying totally preventable. There's always going to be illness, there's always going to be disease around. But dementia is another one of the degenerative illnesses which can be mostly prevented. Why do we start doing that now? So part of my motivation for continuing to run the International Macrobiotic School is to really try and get over to people just the extent to which we can keep ourselves well and take charge of our health. And please, I really encourage you all to take steps in that direction. Many of you, I'm sure, probably are, to keep taking steps to educating yourself, to learning cooking, to learning exercise, whatever kind of form of exercise, doing yoga, tai chi, qigong, pilates, etc., etc. Learning good forms of exercise, paying attention to your emotional healing, having a balanced life, burning yourselves out, etc. Really, our health is primarily in our own hands. I really hope to see this change greatly in the next 25 or 30 years, or in the remains of my lifetime. This is going to also bring about big changes in agriculture. Just heard the other day that organic agriculture overall adds carbon to the soils. Modern agricultural practices tend to create carbon through the production of fertilizers and how the soil is treated, whereas organic agriculture tends to build up carbon in the soil, which is really going to help climate change long term. So eating organically not only is good for our own health, not only does a lot of the food taste better, higher in nutrients, it is also helping the environment. So I really hope that the present trends of eating organic food really increases and spreads. Our relationship with the environment. I think climate change is really bringing it to our attention. It's making it clear that we can't ignore nature. We are actually a part of nature. This is a change in consciousness, a big change in consciousness, and still you can see corporations, governments still having that attitude of, well, we can use nature the way, in whatever way we want. We can't. We're a part of nature. Whatever we do affects nature, and nature is rebelling right now. And we need to listen to nature. And one of the things we need, reducing our use of plastics, using more natural materials, just consuming less. The latest movement in the clothes industry, realizing that most people have far more clothes than they need, or perhaps even ever wear. We don't need to be buying so many clothes. I was shocked a few years ago. I went to Exeter city centre, and I was just one night, and I was just wandering around thinking, and I realised that most of the city centre was just clothes and shoe shops. And why is this? It's partly because there's money to be made, from selling a lot of clothes. But really, many of us possess far more than we need. And in general, let's think more about what we need in terms of material goods rather than what we want or what we would like. Let's just kind of stick to what we need. Consume less. This directly helps the environment. Then I want to say a little bit about preparation for pandemics. Unfortunately, this is very unlikely to be the last pandemic. The main approach that's been used for getting humanity through this pandemic has been through vaccination. I'm not against vaccinations. I am pro-personal choice. But I think there's no doubt that that approach has greatly helped reduce the number of people dying and is helping get it under control. However, my great frustration is that there are a lot of other approaches that could have been taken that I believe, and there's a lot of scientific evidence for, could also greatly help, which has received very little attention. Some Western doctors, consultants, are really standing up now, and I can't remember any particular names, but maybe I can give some references, saying doctors, consultants who've been working in hospitals, treating COVID patients for the last nearly 2 years, saying that what they see is that it's not just anyone that gets serious or life-threatening symptoms of COVID. It is almost nearly everybody has recognizable warning signs. Being greatly overweight or obese makes people much more susceptible. It reduces the immune system. Having high blood sugar levels. Really, I think the first thing that should have happened, March, April 2020, put a 300% tax on refined sugar. Really make it known that regularly eating sugar is one of the things that weakens the immune system. Good scientific evidence for that high blood sugar levels reduce the... Okay,
it does.
All right, I'm going to go on about another 5 minutes. Comorbidities in Western medicine are other illnesses which make one more likely to be affected by COVID seriously. Heart problems, lung problems, maybe some kidney problems, possibly some digestive problems, overweight, etc., type 2 diabetes. So by addressing all of these problems, we can become, as a society, much stronger and much more resilient. Also with vitamin D. Good scientific evidence that if people become low in vitamin D, weaker immune system. So why hasn't the government promoted that, especially for darker skinned people living in more northern or southern climates where there's not so much sun exposure? So there's a lot of measures which could have been taken in this pandemic, but weren't. Very sad. And I really hope that by the time of the next pandemic, that some of these lessons, there'll be some real reflection on this. And that as a world community, we'll be better prepared. We can really strengthen the world's immunity in preparation for the next time there's a pandemic. My kind of great teacher, Michio Kushi, deeply insightful man who made a lot of predictions about the future. He saw that, or he saw what he felt was coming was a real change in consciousness, and this is what we're seeing now. People are becoming more conscious about their actions, about their health, about the world, about other people, about their emotions, about spirituality, about the spirituality of nature, and so on. And he sees this trend continuing for the next few hundred, in fact, the next few thousand years. And so what he emphasized was it's our consciousness that creates our life and the outer reality in our life. And for him, teaching macrobiotics was the best way he had for changing people's consciousness about how we live and how we eat and with our health and how we interact with nature and how we interact with each other. By changing the way we see things, our understanding, and then changing our lifestyle, the way we interact with other people, our relationships, our food, nature, etc. This is how we create the changes that are really needed in the world at this time. So I'm going to finish there. I hope this has been interesting to you. For me, this was what gave me a passion for studying macrobiotics. It was this kind of bigger view of creating change in the world. It feels that a lot of the things that Michio Kushi and other people were saying in 1980, a lot of that has started unfolding, and really we still have so far to go. We still have a long way to go in changing our consciousness, our way of life, our way of relating to nature and to each other. So what I say to people is, let's be on the new wave. Instead of being the old anchor, the old lump of stone that doesn't want to move, let's be on the new wave. Let's create the change that we individually, our societies and the world needs right now. Thank you very much.